This episode comes with a companion free download. If you head over to resilientretailclub.com/numbers, you'll get the guide to the 3 key numbers you need to know in your business and how to calculate them. Have you ever opened up your Shopify dashboard looking for one answer and somehow ending up with 10 new questions? Retailers don't have a lack of data problem. If anything, they have the opposite. They are drowning in information but starving for clarity. I've worked with retailers who have dashboards, apps, reports, spreadsheets, and notifications everywhere, letting them know every single time they make a sale. Yet they still can't answer some very basic questions like, am I making money? Am I on track? And is my stock healthy? Today, I want to talk about cutting through the noise and focusing on the handful of numbers that actually tell you whether your business is healthy. Welcome to the Resilient Retail Game Plan. I'm Catherine Erdly, and this podcast is here to share retail industry trends, insights, and best practices for you, the retailer who's serious about building something that lasts. Many business owners think that the solution is another app, another report, another dashboard, and certainly we are all being sold more AI tools every single day. But the reality is that more information doesn't automatically lead to better decisions. In fact, too many viewpoints can actually make decision-making harder. One of the things that I quite often see is founders who are bamboozled by an excess of data. They have got different tools that are telling them different things. And the big question that's in their mind is really, so what? So now I know all of this information. I can see all of these different things, all of these different elements. And ultimately, I still don't know whether or not I'm actually making any money. They might be looking at Shopify reports, Google Analytics, Klaviyo reports, meta ad reporting, accounting software. They might be running third-party analytic tools, for example, endless spreadsheets looking at heat maps of their website, or getting notifications or insights from all of the different tools that have added AI into it. And again, still not really sure what to be actually doing with it and which numbers they should be focusing on most. Many people will ask me when it comes to doing an end of month review or an end of quarter review, what should I actually be looking at? The goal here really, I believe, is not to try and collect more information. The goal is really to gain some clarity. The first thing that I would suggest that you do is to actually simplify the amount of tools and tech that you are using. There's such a thing as tech creep, where you sign up for something and then all of a sudden you've actually paid for all of these different tools, these plugins, these apps, and you might not even be using them, or you may be looking at them but still not really having your answers. So I definitely recommend doing a bit of housekeeping. If you have a tool or any piece of tool or software that you are using, then for every single one that you're paying for, I would suggest that you ask the following. Is this giving me information that I can't get elsewhere? Am I actually looking at it regularly? And am I doing anything with the information that it's providing? So those 3 questions will help steer you and help you look through. If you've forgotten which ones you've signed up for, which no judgment from me, I think it happens to all of us, definitely take a look and run through all of your direct debits or your recurring payments in your business bank and just ask yourself, what is this? Am I paying for it? What do I even need it for? Because as I said, the danger is that too much information can just cause overwhelm. And if you're not really using it, and it could just be adding to the noise. The truth is that although we are being bombarded all the time by AI and it can feel really overwhelming, it does also create some real opportunities. So for example, Shopify Sidekick is a great AI tool that is allowing people to actually ask using what they call natural language reporting. So natural language reporting basically means that you can ask it a question in a conversational way. Prior to Sidekick coming in and having these capabilities, you would have had to, if you wanted to know what your best sellers were, you would have had to run your sales by product, picked the time period that you wanted, and basically run the report and then saved it in the version that you wanted it, made sure it was showing you all the bits and pieces of information that you wanted, and then saved that report. They actually, even before that, Shopify, they had very fixed reports that you couldn't really amend. They then changed it last year to be much more flexible, but maybe slightly harder to use. But now with Sidekick, you can actually just go in and ask the AI Sidekick, what were my best sellers last month? What was my sales margin last month? Which products are underperforming? So instead of building complex reports where you have to get a lot of different pieces of information, you can now actually use Sidekick or other AI tools for, as I said, that natural language. So you can have a conversation with it, ask it the questions you might otherwise have had to answer yourself. This also means that if even in the last 6 months things have changed, there may be tools and subscriptions that you'd signed up for last year that now that's duplicative of some of the AI capabilities within the tools that you're already using on a day-to-day basis. So again, I would really recommend that you run through and have a look at what you're paying for and make sure that even in the last 6 months, has this changed? Has it shifted? Is this something that you still need? Because a lot of these capabilities have replaced the need for more specific tools. Are there any that you could cancel tomorrow without it changing or affecting your decision-making? In terms of what you actually need, I've certainly seen people running their businesses off their accounting software, their POS system, whether that's Shopify or something else, and a spreadsheet, which I'll come on to more later. So it doesn't always have to be complicated and fancy for you to understand all of the information in your business. In fact, I would say the bigger issue tends to be not that you don't have the right tool for the reporting, but that the data that's in your system is not as detailed as it could be to start off with. So moving on to then, what questions are we actually asking to try and define the health of your store? The first question that I recommend that you ask yourself on a regular basis is, am I making enough money every time I make a sale? In other words, it's not always about revenue, it's about your profit. Your sales margin, the difference between what you buy something for and what you sell it for, is the absolute foundation of your business. It's the engine, the profit engine that drives everything else that you pay for in your business has to be covered by the difference between what you buy something for and what you sell it for. So you need to understand your monthly sales margin. This is one of the most important numbers for you to look at. So your monthly sales margin is expressed as a percentage. So for example, if you are VAT registered and you sell something for £12, if you take the VAT off, then that's £10 excluding VAT. If you're paying £5 for that, then you are paying £5 and you have £5 profit. So that is 5 divided by 10, your price without tax, and that is a 50% margin. So you want to be really clear on what that looks like for your whole business. And the way that you would do that is you look at the sales that you took in the last month without tax, and you take off all of the product costs associated with those sales. Now, there are various different ways of doing this. If you have got all of your cost prices loaded into Shopify, for example, if you're using Shopify, you are able to ask the Sidekick, tell me what my sales margin was last month, and it should give you an accurate answer. For some people, it will be a question of looking at their sales in their accounting software and then comparing that to the COGS, or the cost of goods sold. Now, the only issue with that is that depending on the way that your accounting software is set up, the cost of goods sold that you're seeing may not actually reflect the cost of goods sold for the products you sold in that month. It may just be that you spent more money on stock that month, and therefore your margin ends up looking a little funny. So if you're not sure how that cost of goods sold is calculated, check that with your accountant. But for many people, the best place for them to get this number is to make sure that they've put all of their cost prices into their point of sale system, and then they are able to query the total sales that they took minus the cost of those sales. And that is a very, very important number for you to have a handle on. Because if your margin is deteriorating, or you're not really getting what you want in terms of margin, then your business becomes harder and harder to run. So what do you do if it's not very high? Well, first off, for most businesses that buy in stock from other people, you would expect your sales margin each month to be around 50%. So that's what your kind of starting point. Now, if it's not a 50%, it could be eroded by things like discounts, promotions, clearance activities. Sometimes that's just the way it is. If you're running a big sale, you're likely to end up in a situation where your sales margin is lower than 50% that month. It could also be that your supplier costs have gone up and you have not increased your prices accordingly, and therefore your margin is getting squeezed. It's okay for your margin to dip temporarily. You may have 1 month of the year where you really push into sales that your margin is lower than normal. But what's not good is if it is continually looking low and you're not doing anything to address it. So Make yourself check it once a month. If you don't have all your cost prices in, yes, it is an admin job to get them all loaded in, but it will bear a lot of fruit. It will really help you understand a lot more about your business. And make sure that you're checking your sales margin once a month. Is it stable? Is it improving? Or is it declining? So you want to make sure that you're checking that. And again, you want to make sure that you're doing things to try and improve your margin. So for example, reviewing your pricing, or reviewing how many discounts that you're giving out, or reviewing how many of your sales are actually coming from full price sales versus sales on a discount. And all of those things will help you keep an eye on that sales margin. But that, for me, is the number one number that you should be looking at each month in your business. The second question that I would recommend that you ask yourself is, are you selling enough to cover your costs? This is known as a break-even analysis, and it's one of the most underutilized or underrated numbers in retail. Your break-even point basically tells you how much profit you need to cover your fixed costs. We do this with every client that we have. When we have Stock Doctor, Retail by Design, we ask people to complete this break-even analysis and we review it because it is so illustrative in terms of what's going on in the business. It helps us understand, is the business profitable? What number does the business need to be at to be profitable? And it answers a lot of questions. So if you've been feeling unsure about how things are going in your business, then do definitely check out your break-even number. In my book, Tame Your Tiger, How to Stop Your Product Business Eating You Alive, I go into detail in how to calculate this. But effectively what it's doing is it's looking at, based on an average monthly sales and your average monthly costs, and your average monthly profit margin, are you making enough sales to cover your fixed costs? So without your break-even analysis, you don't necessarily have a really clear idea of what your sales need to be. Sales can feel a bit random. So if you have a £10,000 sales month, is that good? Is that fantastic? Or is it really terrible? The other thing I will say is that sometimes when I'm working with a client, we'll run the break-even analysis, or this happens fairly commonly. And actually, the business is nicely profitable. There's a nice buffer, and it should really be something that feels quite comfortable for the owner. But what they are doing is they're actually not recognizing that the business is quite comfortably profitable. They're still really stressing because they don't have that visibility. They don't know that they definitely have got all of their costs covered by the sales. So without your break even, you don't know whether you're on track. You don't know whether you're falling short. And you also can't really see if any new costs that you want to bring in are affordable. So, for example, one of my favorite uses for a break-even analysis is when we're able to say, okay, well, I want to bring in extra cost. I want to bring in this person to help with the business. I want to start paying for advertising in this way. And without the break-even analysis, we can't see what the sales increase needs to be to justify that additional cost. So having it set up is really, really helpful. And then once a month, you can have a look and see, how does that compare to what I actually did? Did I do the sales that I needed to do? Was my profit margin where it needed to be? And how much have I actually spent compared to what I think my average costs are? And therefore, am I working towards a profitable business model or not? Profit and loss, this is something that you can also look at on a month-by-month basis inside your accounting software. This will give you somewhat of a similar idea whether or not you made a profit or loss. Again, the only thing that gets a bit tricky with your profit and loss inside your accounting software is when you have big fluctuations in when you're spending money on stock, and that can throw it off and make it hard for you to understand whether the fundamental business model is profitable or not. So therefore, the break-even analysis, which assumes a sort of even amount of stock purchased throughout the year, which I know is not realistic, but it's a good diagnostic tool, that is a slightly different thing than a profit and loss statement, and it can help you understand fundamentally if the framework of the business is healthy. And then the third question that I would recommend that you ask yourself on a regular basis is your stock turning fast enough? So this, for me, is one of the most important numbers that you need to look at. And again, if you're not currently keeping records of your stock, then I highly recommend that you start, because it makes it so much easier for you to keep an eye on this. So stock is cash. Cash is stock. If you think about every product in your business as a £10 note, if it's a £10 product, think of it as a £10 note, you can really clearly see where the money is in your business. And the longer it sits on your shelves, then the longer your money is tied up. So stock turn matters because the faster your stock turns, the healthier your cash flow is. And the slower the turn, the more pressure is on your cash. So if this is not something that you're watching, you can sleepwalk yourself into a cash flow problem. A simple metric to measure is how much stock do I have and how does that compare to my sales? The formula that I like to look at on a monthly basis is the number of weeks cover. So weeks cover is your stock value divided by your average weekly sales. So for example, if you have £150,000 worth of stock and your average expected weekly sales for the next 12 weeks is around £10,000 a week, then you have got 15 weeks worth of stock. Now, this is a theoretical number because we all know it's not exactly like your stock would last for 15 weeks because you'd be selling down to nothing. But it's a really good yardstick for you to measure and to understand how much stock you've got in your business and whether or not it's growing and therefore eating up more cash, or whether or not it's decreasing and any stock clearance activities that you are doing are actually working. So most retailers will know what their sales are, but they don't necessarily know what their stock number is. And that can cause stress because they can't see if they are in fact keeping an eye on turning their stock quickly, or whether or not they are just letting it pile up. So if you don't have a stock plan, then you can start by simply monitoring your stock levels every month and working out, is my stock cover going up or is it going down? It's another reason why it's a great thing to have a sales plan, because if you have a sales plan, you'll know what your forecasted average weekly sales for the next 12 weeks are. If you don't have a sales plan, you're going to have to estimate that number. So I would set up your sales plan, work out each month what your average weekly sales for the next 12 weeks coming up is, and then use that to calculate how many weeks worth of stock that you have got. And then that is one number that you can look at each month and ask yourself, is this going up or is it going down? Now, you will typically carry fewer weeks worth of stock in peak times. So when you're in the run up to Christmas, you would expect your number of weeks of stock to be lower because you're expecting a big sales increase, for example. And then in January or February, then your stock will most likely be turning slower than it is at the peak times. However, you don't want it to get too out of hand and you want to make sure it's not increasing and creeping up year on year. So all of those reasons are the perfect excuse to take a look once a month at how much stock that you've got and to make sure that you have a record of that. So my slightly old-fashioned view is I still love a spreadsheet because it's one place that you can record these numbers, it's one version of the truth, and it's easy to review trends. Yes, you can calculate a lot of this information by asking Sidekick, you can get reports run, you can get plugins and tools that will look at some of this data for you. But if each week you note down in a spreadsheet what your weekly sales are, and each month you note down what your sales margin is, your sales versus your target, your sales versus last year, the stock value that you're currently holding, and the number of weeks cover, then you have got one place that you can very quickly see in seconds how the business is doing. So make sure that you're building something that is for you. This is for you. It's not for an investor. It can be extremely simple. In fact, I would much rather that you wrote something down on a Post-it note and stuck it on your screen than you went ahead and created something that was really complicated, was hugely difficult to keep updated, and also just didn't give you that much information, or something that just put you off ever doing it because it took too long. You want a dashboard that helps you make decisions. Do I need to improve my margin? Do I need to spend less on stock? Do I need to take action to speed up my stock? How am I doing against my break-even analysis? What do I need to do to keep moving this business towards profit? You don't need to drown in data. You just need to answer these three core questions. Am I making enough profit on every sale? Am I selling enough to cover my costs? And is my stock turning enough? So don't forget, keeping it simple can really help you take action as opposed to making it too complicated and then just getting stuck in the complexity. So why not take 30 minutes, go through all of the reporting tools that you're paying for, work out which you actually need, and then create one simple place to track those three key stats, because clarity beats complexity every single time. If you want to know how to get a handle on the three key numbers that you need to know in your business, then head over to resilientretailclub.com/numbers and download my free guide of the key numbers that you need to know and how to get them. Thanks for listening. Why not take a moment to rate and review the podcast? You can rate it inside Apple Podcasts and also inside Spotify. And of course, if you like, follow or subscribe, you'll be the first to know about each new episode when it comes out on a Thursday morning. See you next week.